Welcome this morning to Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal. Thank you for coming in. You sure have been busy in Iowa lately.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to spend so much time in your beautiful state.
All right, we want to get right to a new poll that just came out, a new CNN poll that has you polling at less than 1%. And you have spent so much time in the state doing a lot of town hall meetings and get a huge response wherever you go. What is your reaction to these numbers? Because you're in the single digits in Iowa as well.
Sure. I think the honest truth is if you look at these polls, nobody has any votes right now. Look, just remember a few weeks ago, everybody thought Scott Walker had already won Iowa. Donald Trump was nowhere. Now we've seen that turn around upside down. The reality is this. Our strategy is to go to every county. The votes are here in Iowa. Iowa will vote first, and in February, we're building momentum here. As you said, we're getting great crowds, great reaction everywhere we go. The reason I'm running has nothing to do with polls. The reason we're running is the idea of America is slipping away. $18 trillion of debt. A president who's declared war on trans fats, a truce with Iran. We've got now a president who won't even say the words radical Islamic terrorism. We've created a new entitlement. We can't afford the government we've got. Planned Parenthood selling baby organs across the country. I'm running because we've got to save the idea of America. So we're getting a great response in Iowa. We're going to continue focusing here in Iowa where the voters will vote first. There's a saying in Louisiana, you go hunting where the ducks are. We're going to focus our efforts here, and we're going to continue to do that.
You know, Governor Perry had a similar strategy, and the money ran out, and he was unable to get on the main debate stage. This situation might sound similar to you. Why is it that you're going to be able to keep going when somebody like Governor Perry, who had run before, knew the lay of the land in Iowa, is out?
Well, a couple of things. One, I think we had a great debate last week with CNN. For example, we took on the establishment. We said that we've got a surrender caucus in D.C., and what do I mean by that? What I hear from voters across Iowa is, as angry as they are with President Obama and Bernie Sanders and the left, they're even angrier at the Republicans for not doing anything.
We're going to get to that, but there may not be an undercard debate next time. That field is shrinking, and I read that somebody said it's going to get down to an interview at some point. You know, are you worried about the ability to be able to get your message out and to get on that debate stage?
Not at all. Look, the establishment, the party leaders, the donors, they don't get to pick our nominee. The voters get to pick the nominee. And the reality is there's no substitute for standing in front of voters directly answering their questions. As we were talking about before, our town halls sometimes go 3 hours. We stay till the last person gets asked their last question. Not everybody can do that. You know, a lot of candidates can give speeches. A lot of candidates can buy TV advertisement, but it's different being able to answer the tough questions. In this field, for example, every Republican says they're going to shrink the size of government. I'm the only one that's done it. No other candidate's done it. 8 governors running. Not one of them has reduced the size of government. The senators running. They give great speeches, they give great filibusters. I'm glad they've got big bladders, but they've never reduced the size of government. So I think what sets us apart is we can answer those tough questions, and we've got a proven track record.
Big bladders as in the filibuster time?
That's exactly
you can't
right.
go to the bathroom during
yeah, that's all they do. They stand out there and they give speeches, but nothing's changed. I mean, they won't stop the Iran deal. They won't stop funding for Planned Parenthood. They won't stop amnesty. They won't stop Obamacare. You know,
we're going to get to that in a second, but I wanted to ask you quickly about something in the news, because the U.S. is now planning to take 85,000 refugees from Syria and other countries in the next year. Do you agree with those numbers and the plan to screen? Are you confident that folks are going to be screened carefully?
I'm not, and I don't agree with that plan. Look, America is the most compassionate country in the world, and that's a wonderful thing. But 2 things about this refugee crisis. We need to be very honest. The reason we're seeing millions of people fleeing Syria, hundreds of thousands going to Europe right now, is because of President Obama's failed policies. He drew a red line in the sand, said if Assad used chemical weapons, there'd be these serious consequences. It didn't happen. That has given a vacuum, it's created a vacuum. You've seen ISIS get stronger. You've seen Sunni allies hesitate to go in there and fully prosecute the fight against ISIS. And this administration refuses to train directly and arm the Kurds and really go after ISIS to hunt them down and kill them. So first, simply allowing in more refugees is putting a Band-Aid on the problem. The real way to fix this problem is to fix our flawed foreign policy. Secondly,
in the meantime, though,
what do you do with all these people?
You've got a humanitarian crisis, and they're overwhelming some of these countries in Europe.
What I worry about is we normally take in about 70,000 refugees a year, and we have a vetting process in place. This administration has not explained to us why it makes sense to short-circuit or go around that vetting process, how they're going to handle these increased numbers. What I worry about is we're already getting reports from the Middle East that included in some of these refugees could be ISIS militants, could be radical Islamic terrorists, so we shouldn't short-circuit the vetting process. The real answer to this is to solve our foreign policy. Right now, we've got a foreign policy that leads with weakness, which is provocative to evil, which has encouraged our enemies. Simply allowing in more refugees won't solve that problem.
So, and you're talking about the vetting process. Do you think Muslims should be excluded?
Look, I think anybody that comes from a country with ties to radical Islam absolutely should be looked at more carefully. And that's not a new policy. That is something that has been implemented in our country, and I think that should be done. And you've seen the previous reports about folks that have come in previously that turned out, and law enforcement figured out they had ties to radical Islam. I believe that happened in Kentucky. And we must not allow folks that come into our country to use our freedoms to undermine freedoms for others. So absolutely, if people are coming from a region of the world where we know there is radical Islamic activity, of course we should look at them more carefully.
Well, Governor Huckabee, I think Senator Santorum as well, suggested that you don't bring in Muslims. You have a separate policy for Christians who are being persecuted. Senator Santorum said even leave Christians in the region so that they can be repatriated as soon as the violence is over. But Senator Cruz, for example, said also exclude Muslims, just bring in the Christians who are being persecuted. Is that the way you would see the policy if you were president?
Well, two things. One, I do think we need to do more to protect Christians that are being persecuted all over the world. We see Christians under physical assault, not just in Syria, Iraq, the regions we're talking about, but all over the world. And certainly I think we can do more to stand up for their rights and make sure they're not being persecuted and offer protection. When it comes to anybody coming into our country, my criteria is pretty simple. I think we should let people into our country that make our country stronger, not those that make our country weaker. And so if people are coming from a region where there are known ties to radical Islam, of course we should vet them to make sure they're not coming here to undermine our freedoms. Of course we should insist that we want people that want to assimilate, that want to integrate, that want to learn English, that want to adopt our values, that want to go to work. One of the things I think we need to insist on is assimilation. And I think that is what's causing so much of the anxiety about who we let into our country. The left now says we're not a melting pot. They say we're a salad bowl. We need to move away from that. That is ridiculous. We need to move away from this hyphenated American nonsense. We're not Asian Americans or African Americans or rich or poor Americans. We're all Americans. That has been a trademark of our country for a long time.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, but, I mean, you come from a family of immigrants, and how do you deny people who are searching for a better life, as your family did?
Well, and I'm proud of what my parents did and how they came here. They came here nearly 45 years ago in the search of freedom and opportunity, the American dream. They came legally, and they came here to work. My mom went to school at LSU. She got a job. My dad got a job. They didn't come here to be dependent on the government. They came here to be Americans. They didn't come here to raise their children as Indian Americans. They love the old country. They love their heritage, but if they wanted to be Indians, they would have stayed in India. They came here to be Americans. My message to folks that want to come here is come legally. Learn English, adopt our values, work hard, assimilate, integrate. That's what my parents did. I think a smart immigration policy makes our country stronger. A dumb one makes our country weaker. Two things we've got to do today. We have to secure our border. We can get that done in 6 months. We have to put an end to sanctuary cities. This idea that you can break the law and there are no consequences. I know Congress wants to defund them. I would go further. I would make local officials criminally liable as accessories to the crimes committed by people who shouldn't be here in the first place. You lock up a couple of mayors, you wouldn't have cities breaking federal law. We have to insist people that want to come here should want to be Americans. To me, that's common sense. Nobody has a right to come here. And to me, there are millions of people all over the world that want to come here. Why wouldn't we say, of course you should want to be an American before we let you come here legally?
Some of your opponents, though, have raised issues that seem to almost foster discrimination against people who are different. And just a recent example, Dr. Ben Carson said he would not advocate, he doesn't think a Muslim should be elected president because Islam is inconsistent with the U.S. Constitution. What is your reaction to that? And are you concerned that the Republican Party is going to, with this rhetoric, really incite fear and discrimination against people who are different?
Well, a couple of things. Look, anybody who meets the legal criteria obviously is free to run for president, and the voters get to decide who our next president is. As for me, I'm a conservative Christian. I'm going to vote for somebody who shares my values. By the way, I'm biased towards a Christian governor from Louisiana being our next president. That's who I'm voting for. But when it comes to voting for our president, the next president, look, I know the media loves to play this hypothetical question and ask, what about this, what about that? Look, find me this supposed hypothetical Republican Muslim candidate who's for religious liberty, who is for hunting down and defeating radical Islamic terrorism, who is for repealing and replacing Obamacare. And then let's talk specifically. But the answer to the question is this. Anybody that meets the legal criteria has a right to run for president. The voters get to decide who our president is. As for me, as a conservative Christian, I'm going to vote for somebody who shares my values. In this election, I'm advocating for the governor of Louisiana. I think I'd be the best
And as a
candidate.
conservative Christian, you talk a lot about religious liberty on the campaign trail. And speaking to conservative Christians, why would someone who is not a Christian vote for you?
Well, look, I do believe that Christians today face discrimination in our country. And you see it whether it's the florist, the caterer, the musician who doesn't want to perform in a wedding that violates their traditional religious beliefs. And I think that as a Christian, I share those beliefs, and I think that it's important that our First Amendment rights are protected. What I would say to that person who may disagree with me, who may not be a Christian or who may not agree with my views on marriage, I would say that what is great about America is we've got the rights whether you agree with us or not. So, for example, we give people the freedom of speech whether we agree with their speech or not. My argument to that person who may not be Christian, may not agree with me on marriage would be, I think it's important in America, whether you agree with us or not, that you support and fight for our First Amendment rights to live our lives according to our religious beliefs. I think it's something the Founding Fathers got it's incredibly important. I think they got this right. The purpose of government is not to create, but rather to secure and protect our God-given rights. So if I were talking to that person who may disagree with me, I'd say, look, you don't have to agree with me, but it should be important to you that in America I've got the right to live my life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, according to my sincerely held religious beliefs. And that's greater than just being able to go to church and saying what I want. That's being able to live my life.
But what about protecting the rights of people who don't believe in God? I mean, should their tax dollars go to pay for the salaries of teachers who lead prayer in schools, for example?
Well, look, I'm certainly a big believer that the Founding Fathers never intended to take God out of the public square. This idea that America was supposed to be this secularized country where we can't worship. I know in Knoxville, for example, there's this big controversy about being able to put up a cross in a veterans memorial. I don't think the Founding Fathers ever intended, even as they fought to secure the rights for every American, they never intended to take God out of the public square. I think the left has got a radical view of America, a secular view of America that our Founding Fathers wouldn't recognize, that our parents wouldn't recognize, I wouldn't want our children to recognize. I think we can be tolerant and respectful of people that disagree with us. I think we're all created equally in God's eyes, no matter who we are. I think as a Christian, I'm taught to love those, even those that disagree with me or oppose me. But that doesn't mean that, for example, as a governor, I have to stop being Christian as a governor. Or a county clerk in Kentucky has to stop being Christian simply because she's a county clerk. Or a florist has to say, well, I can't bring my Christian beliefs into my workplace as a florist. So I don't think the Founding Fathers intended for us to have to be a secular country where we take God out of the public square. I think that we would be a poorer country for that if we actually evolved into that, and I think that's an important issue.
And speaking of that, I read a fact that at one point in your life, you were interested in becoming a priest. Tell us about that, and why did you decide against it?
Sure. Well, you know, I'm a convert to Christianity, and it wasn't an overnight conversion. I didn't have a sudden epiphany like St. Paul did. It took me 7 long years. I accepted Christ as my personal Lord and Savior in a non-denominational church called Chapel on the Campus at the age of 16. And so I joked I was the only kid telling his parents he was going to a party so he could go to church. Because, I mean, they weren't Christians, and they're not Christians. They weren't, you know, at that time, they didn't really understand this whole conversion experience.
They were Hindu.
They are, and they still are, and they still are Hindus. And so as part of my process of going through faith, as I went to college especially, I joined different religious groups like Campus Crusade for Christ and InterVarsity and different Bible studies. And that's right, in college and in graduate school, I prayed and thought about going into the full-time ministry, becoming a priest. And at the end of the day, through a prayer and retreat and discernment process, I realized I didn't have that special calling, that vocation. I think it's an amazing calling. I tell priests and ministers all the time, what they do is so much more important than anything we do in politics or in the business circles, because they're impacting people's lives for all of eternity. And Scripture is very specific that certain people are called to this. Is a very important calling. And for a while, I thought and prayed about whether that was my calling, whether that was what I was being called to do. You know, my conversion experience was so unlikely. During that 7 years, there was actually a pastor that gave up on me, that said, look, this kid's too stubborn. Hard to believe. This kid's too stubborn. He's got too many questions. He'll never become a Christian. And so as a convert, I think I felt like God had done this amazing thing in my life, and I was trying to figure out why that happened. And was I supposed to become a priest? Was I supposed to become a minister as part of that? Ended up not doing that. I think all of us, whether in the ministry or not, are called to plant those seeds of the gospel. So I try to live my life and share my testimony, my experience with others. So many people shared their experiences with me, and it changed my life. You never know whose life you might impact, whether you realize it or not, just by planting a seed of the gospel.
Well, Talk a little bit about the role of the federal government now as it relates to states. You're governor of Louisiana, of course, and here in Iowa, nitrates and runoff and water quality are big issues. Would you eliminate the EPA? You've talked about reining it back, or would you rein it all the way back to the point where states are solely in charge of their environmental protection?
I think that the EPA under this administration has gone way too far, and I think it does need to be scaled back. I think there's a role for the EPA, but not what it's doing today. So, for example, as a governor, we're actually in court suing this administration, the Obama administration, over the water rule. We think they go too far in trying to regulate the water in our backyards and our family farms. We're also in court over their new so-called power rule. And now that's not ripe for litigation, but we're in court waiting for that rule to be finalized.
But that water rule helps protect your state from all of the farm pesticides that run down the Mississippi River. You've got the dead zone in the Gulf, you know, how is your state going to persuade Iowa and other states up the river to stop dumping poison that comes down to you?
Well, two things. One, I think there's this arrogance on the left that thinks that D.C. has all the answers, and if they don't do it, the states won't be interested in protecting our own environments, and I think that's wrong. So, for example, in the dead zone issue, there is actually a coalition that's been working together, including Iowa, including Louisiana, including universities and farmers, that have taken voluntary and are looking at other steps they can take that are win-win situations that help farmers in terms of being more efficient with fertilizer and also help the water quality in the river. So I think it's arrogant for D.C. to think, well, if we don't do this, the states won't on their own want to protect their own water, their own air. And what I worry about is that under the EPA, you get these job-killing regulations and rules that really don't end up being the best way to protect the environment and instead kill good-paying jobs in our states. So I've got a lot more confidence in the states than this president does. You know, President Reagan said in his inaugural speech, famously, the federal government didn't create the states. The states created the federal government. So yes, there is a role for the EPA, but it does, I think under this administration it's gone way too far, and they really don't. The honest truth is they don't trust the states. They don't think we're smart enough, whether it's to protect our environment. They don't think we're smart enough to make curriculum decisions in our schools. That's how you have Common Core. They don't think we're smart enough to decide what our kids should be eating at school lunch. They don't think we're smart enough to do a lot of things, and I think that's a mistake.
And speaking of curriculum and Common Core and the federal government versus the states, you just lost a fight against Common Core in your state. A judge refused your motion for preliminary injunction against the Department of Education. What do you do now? Do you give up?
Oh, not at all. We've actually passed laws to get Common Core out of our classrooms. We actually sued Arne Duncan and the Obama administration in federal court, arguing that this is a violation of the 10th Amendment and federal law for them to force states, try to coerce states into doing Common Core. We're actually going to the Fifth Circuit. We're very confident we'll win on appeal. Even the Supreme Court ruled, even when I disagreed with their upholding of Obamacare, they ruled the federal government cannot force states, in that case, to expand Medicaid. The federal government cannot be dictating to states what they should be doing, and this is an example, I think, of the federal government overreaching. So in our state, we've passed multiple bills to get us out of Common Core. We're actually going to go through a process to set our own standards. It'll be important in Louisiana we continue to elect leaders that are committed to getting rid of Common Core. My objection to Common Core is twofold. One, just philosophically, the federal government has never had the primary responsibility for making local K through 12 decisions. And so, for example, right now it's math and ELA. What would happen if this administration wanted to do American history? I don't think they would teach American exceptionalism. I think it'd be all about victimhood and criticizing America. Secondly, as a parent, when you actually look at the actual content, I'm very unhappy, for example, with the math standards. My little boy, my youngest, is in the 4th grade. A couple of years ago in the 2nd grade, he brought home his Common Core math. He's very good at math. He gets all the answers right, but it's very frustrating the way they're trying to teach Common Core math, and I've heard this from a lot of parents. And my point is this, at the end of the day, if you don't like the way they're teaching math, you should be able to go to your local teacher. You should be able to go to your principal. You should be able to go to your local school board and have an opportunity to provide input. You can't do that with Common Core when it's a one-size-fits-all approach from the federal government. Now, I believe in high standards. And too often people that are for Common Core say, you're either for Common Core or that must mean that you're against high standards. That's ridiculous. I'm against Common Core, but I am for high standards. This goes to the previous question. There's this arrogance on the left that thinks they have all the wisdom in D.C., and that's simply not true.
Well, let's talk about how you're managing your state, because you started the year with a big budget deficit, $1.6 billion in the hole. You signed a budget at the end of the session, $24 billion that included $720 million of additional revenue to help you pay for the programs in your state. So, and part of your original budget was cutting higher education. That didn't end up happening at the end of the year. Talk about some of those budget choices that you made. You cut taxes earlier in your term as governor, and now had to raise revenue in order to fill budget holes. How did that work?
So a couple of things. Let's actually look at the real budget. So the budget, since I've been governor, we have balanced our budget 8 years in a row. We've never raised taxes. We actually signed the largest income tax cut in the state's history and got rid of a lot of unorthodox taxes.
Well,
So,
what was that $720 million then that's in the budget this year?
so no, our budget actually continues to shrink. Our budget is 26% smaller than when I started. We got 30,000 fewer state bureaucrats than the day I took office. We've had 8 credit upgrades, so people, obviously the credit agencies say we've been fiscally responsible. We created, there's been a lot of focus on the concern that it's getting more and more expensive for families to be able to afford higher education. So we created a higher education tax credit to help families afford the cost of education in Louisiana. Now, even with the tuition increases that have happened in Louisiana, that's part of the increased revenue. We're still one of the 10 lowest states when it comes to student debt. We're still one of the 10 lowest states when it comes to tuition, especially in the South. So we're still doing very, very well. But we haven't raised taxes. We balanced the budget. And you're right, we didn't have to cut higher education. We fully funded education and health care. I know the left always says, look, there's never enough money in government. We've always got to raise taxes. We said we're not doing that. That's what they do in D.C. We have balanced our budget. We have cut spending. I want to emphasize that 30,000 fewer people working for the state of Louisiana than we took office. I don't think anybody's cut that much government spending anywhere, any place, any time.
So where is this $720 million of new revenue? Is it user fees? What is it that helped you balance your budget then?
No, again, the budget continues to shrink. And again, I think that if you actually look at the tax credits, that offset the increases, some of the increases that were allowed. So I think there were some tuition increases and other things, but there were also tax credits to help families afford those. Now, I did propose, and one of the things that maybe you're referring to, we proposed, the legislature didn't go along with all of this, we proposed scaling back some of these refundable tax credits where it exceeded people's tax liability. It was basically corporate welfare. And we said that makes no sense, where the state of Louisiana is actually paying people above and beyond their tax liability, and a lot of companies get these special breaks. That's corporate welfare. That's spending. And we proposed scaling a lot of that back. Now, the legislature went along with some of that, not as much as we would have liked. I'm a big believer that we need to get rid of the corporate welfare and lower tax rates for everybody.
And what's your overall plan for higher education? What do you think is the state's responsibility, and how much money should state taxpayers be putting into the colleges and universities in your state?
Well, what we've done in Louisiana, we actually now are at record high retention and graduation rates. You actually see our universities and community technical colleges are doing well. Our community and technical colleges have been some of the fastest growing in the country. We've invested over $700 million in infrastructure improvements since I've been governor. One of the programs I'd emphasize, because I know there's a lot of concern about the affordability of colleges, we've got a program called TOPS that we have fully funded. So in Louisiana, if you have a 20 ACT and a 2.5 GPA, we will pay for your tuition at a public university or two-year school, wherever you want to go, that you can get in. If you go to a private school, we'll give you the same amount of money to apply to that tuition there in Louisiana as well. If you do better than a 20, or if you do better than that 2.5, we'll give you more money to pay for books, to pay for housing, to pay for other things. So one of the reasons that we actually are one of the 10 best states in terms of student debt and student borrowing when it comes to affording higher education is we've invested in this TOPS program, and we spent hundreds of millions of dollars. What we have seen is that we've got better retention and graduation rates. We have more kids staying in high school, more kids continuing their education. At the end of the day, you hear Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton saying, we're going to give everybody free college education. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, the reality is the federal government can't afford the government. We can't afford the government we've got today. I'm just waiting for them to promise free houses and cars while they're out. I mean, why stop at free college? But I do think there's a role for states. I think states have a role to decide how much they want to invest in their schools, in merit-based programs, financial-based programs. One of the reasons we've invested in education, not the only reason, but one of the reasons, is our economy is growing. It's booming. We've got $60 billion of projects coming, over 90,000 jobs coming into our states. What we hear from companies time and time again, 70% of them tell us one of their top 2 concerns is being able to find a skilled worker. We're one of the 5 best states in terms of low taxes, state and local taxes. We've cut back regulations. You have to have the skilled workers, so we're investing in our schools.
And one more thing about the budget. One of your vetoes dealt with paying the state taxpayer money to your security detail while you're traveling the country running for president. Why did you decide that that was important, keeping the budget?
Well, look, that was a partisan trick. It was offered by the chairman of the Democratic Party. The reality is this. We leave security decisions up to the Louisiana State Police, and they do a great job protecting me and my family. They're required to do that. We never interfere with their decisions. We always defer to them, and I'm proud they do such a great job.
And let's turn back to Washington again. At the Faith and Family Forum, you were very critical. You blasted Republican congressional leaders for not standing up for conservative principles. You said you're angrier with Republicans in D.C. than with Democrats.
Absolutely. Well, look, here's the choice we've got today. You've got honest socialists on the left. And give Bernie Sanders credit. He's willing to honestly call himself a socialist. And we've got lying conservatives on the right. And what I mean by that is these Republicans that run for Congress tell us one thing and do another when they get elected. They told us, for example, if we gave them the majority last year, which we did, that they would get rid of Obamacare and stop amnesty. They didn't do either. This year, they have already waved the white flag of surrender. They won't fight against funding Planned Parenthood. You look at this bad deal with Iran. They passed a very bad Corker bill, by the way, that every Senate Republican except Tom Cotton voted for, including Lindsey Graham and Rubio and Cruz and Rand Paul, all these guys running for president, voted for this bad bill. Instead of a two-thirds vote to approve the bad Iran deal, now it takes a two-thirds vote to reject the bad Iran deal. What I want to know is why in the world wouldn't they use the nuclear option to stop Iran from becoming a nuclear power? Why wouldn't they say, Mr. President, it's going to take 51 votes for us to disavow this bill, disavow this bad deal? Or why wouldn't they at least enforce this flawed Corker bill and say, you were supposed to share the entire agreement with us. We didn't get the secret side agreement, so you're not in compliance. Instead, what we see is they refuse to fight. Now, look at these Planned Parenthood videos. These are barbaric. We canceled the Planned Parenthood contract in Louisiana so they don't get taxpayer funding. In D.C., they're just talking about it, and they've already said they're going to give up this fight. If we can't fight as a Republican Party to protect innocent human life, and if we can't cut off funding for Planned Parenthood after these videos, what good is the Republican Party? And I've said if we can't win that, if we can't make this a winning issue, it seems to me that it may be time to start thinking about why do we have this Republican Party.
And when you say that, are you suggesting that conservatives should abandon the Republican Party if it doesn't nominate a true conservative?
I'm saying it's not enough to send just any Republican to the White House. I'm saying these are incredibly important times for our country. And if we don't rescue the idea of America, we're at risk of losing the idea of America. And so right now the fight is within our party for who are we going to be. You know, Jeb Bush says we've got to be willing to lose the primary in order to win the general election. I disagree with that. That's the establishment telling us to hide our conservative beliefs, our conservative views. If we do that again, we're going to lose again. And if we do that again, we'll deserve to lose again. This country doesn't need a second liberal party. It doesn't need a cheaper version of the Democratic Party. It needs us to stand for our conservative beliefs. So right now, our fight is within our party. Are we going to have a backbone? Are we going to stand up? Part of what I think we need to do with the establishment in D.C. is we need term limits. We need to fire them all there. We need citizen legislators that live under the same rules they apply to the rest of us. Instead, we've got folks that go up there, they never come home, they become seven-figure lobbyists after they're done being congressmen.
But so if you, just to follow up, if the party would nominate Bush or Trump or Kasich or Christie, would you support?
Look, I'm a lifelong Republican. My point is, well, first of all, I think we're going to nominate me. I think we're going to nominate Governor Jindal. I think we're going to nominate a committed conservative. But my point to the voters is not only in this presidential election do we need to fight for our principles, but also when it comes to these House and Senate elections as well. We, for too long, have simply sent folks that want to go along to get along. Look, the Republican Party is not the party of big government. That's great. But we mustn't become the party of big business. Big business is the one that's pushing common courts, pushing open borders, that's pushing amnesty. It's time to stand up to the big business interests and say enough's enough. These politicians work for us, not the other way around.
If you get elected president, you're going to have to work with some of these people in Congress that you've been accusing of being surrenderers and practically being spineless. I mean, how are you going to work with Republican leadership in Congress if you're elected president?
Well, you know, the good news is they're followers, not leaders. Same thing happened in Louisiana. My first special session was on ethics. I campaigned and said, look, we're going to have to push the hogs away from the trough, and they'll squeal when we do that. A lot of cynics, a lot of political watchers said, oh, you can never get that done in Louisiana. We are notorious for having weak ethics laws. We passed the toughest ethics laws in the country. Went from the bottom 5 to the top 5 Better Government Association, 44th worst to number 1 according to the Center for Public Integrity for legislative disclosure. And we did it because we mobilized the public. We campaigned on it, and we went to the public and said, we've got to get this done. We can do that in D.C. We need real leadership in D.C. And I think with real leadership, it's not too late to rescue the idea of America. But if we continue down this path towards socialism, we're going to turn the American dream into the European nightmare. We'll have a generation of Americans that think the American dream is for government to take care of them. That's not the American dream.
I want to ask one quick question. We're running short on time but about your plan to replace Obamacare. In part, you talk about essentially making tax equity. What do you mean by that? And how would that work for somebody who is working for a company that is getting tax breaks right now to provide health care?
Sure. So my plan repeals all of Obamacare, does not create a new entitlement program, and does not subsidize every American's health care from birth to death, like Scott Walker's and some of these other guys do. Instead, we do what's called a standard tax deduction. We focus on lowering the cost of health care, helping the truly vulnerable, and then third, putting patients and doctors in control.
For individuals to get that tax deduction as opposed to their employers.
So like if you're working for an employer, you could use your standard tax deduction to buy your health insurance through your employer like you do today. Or if you decide, you know what, I want to buy it through my church or my social club or my trade association, you could choose to do that as well. In other words, you wouldn't, right now, if you leave that employer-provided health care, there's a good chance you could lose that tax benefit if you want to buy your health care somewhere else. Under my plan, the consumer would be in charge. They could use that tax deduction through their employer or through another mechanism if they choose to do that instead.
You've also talked about a high-risk pool that would be subsidized for people who maybe already have a pre-existing condition, for example. Some from the right have actually criticized that as being possibly too expensive. Do you feel like that is something that is worth investing in and you're willing to pay a little more, or do you just agree that it's going to cost a lot of money?
No, I think you have to help those that are truly vulnerable, those with pre-existing conditions, those that can't afford their health care. We give $10 billion a year, over $100 billion over 10 years to the states. They can choose to do high-risk pools, reinsurance. Look, I think this is a legitimate and important need. I want to help lower the cost of health care, empower, and we talked about folks with employer-provided health care. If they don't have employer-provided health care, they also get that tax deduction. But you also, separately from that, you do have to do something to help those that are truly vulnerable. My little boy, I've got a middle child who, for example, needed open heart surgery when he was 3 months old. I want him to be able to buy health care in the private insurance market as he gets older, when he's not on my insurance policy anymore. I don't want him to be priced out of health care, and I also don't want him to be dependent on a government program. So I do think there are things we can do with the states to lower the cost of health care for those that have pre-existing conditions that do have. But I think you can do that without disrupting the entire health care marketplace. I think you can do that without Obamacare, without putting bureaucrats between patients and their doctors, without the government taking over our health care.
Okay, and we're getting a wrap here. One final question on a lighter note, something a lot of people don't know, that your real name isn't Bobby. And our producer was interested in knowing how you came about the name Bobby and why you chose that of all the kids on the Brady Bunch.
Well, it was when I was 4 years old. As my mom says, she went to pick me up from school, and apparently the teacher says, well, you know, your boy has a new name. He says, what are you talking about? Apparently, I just showed up without telling my parents or anybody else. I showed up at school one day and told all my friends to call me Bobby. When I used to get home from school, the Brady Bunch was in syndication. I could watch it. You know, I was allowed to watch a little bit of TV before I'd go do my homework or go outside and play or do whatever, and that was one of the shows I'd watch every day in syndication. And if you remember the show, Bobby Brady was the youngest. He was about my age. We probably had similar interests. You know, we didn't like homework. We didn't like girls. We're about the same age at that time. My parents sat me down later and said, now, all right, are you going to be Greg tomorrow? I mean, is this, you know, is this permanent? Like,
Peter.
And in Louisiana, in the South, we have nicknames. I tell people it could have been worse because Gilligan's Island used to come on that afternoon as well. I don't think I'd ever been elected governor if my name had been Gilligan. So I think Bobby worked out pretty well for me.
Could have been the professor.
Yeah, that's right.
There you go.
Well, thank you very much, Governor, for coming and joining us today on Close Up.
Thank you both for having me.
We'll be seeing you a lot in Iowa.
Absolutely.